The Texas sun burned mercilessly on an empty road. Behind the sealed doors of a truck, faint cries fought against silence, and time was running out. It was mid-afternoon when the Border Patrol unit spotted the abandoned truck on a remote Texas road. At first, it looked like just another deserted vehicle under the blistering sun. But as the agents drew near, they heard muffled knocks and desperate voices inside. In that instant, they realized they were standing between life and death. If you believe stories of courage should be told, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Agent Miguel Rodriguez had been patrolling the same stretch of Highway 83 for over 6 years. The asphalt shimmered under the relentless Texas heat, and the temperature gauge on his vehicle read 112 degrees Fahrenheit. This was one of the most desolate routes in the Rio Grande Valley, where abandoned vehicles were as common as tumbleweeds rolling across the desert landscape. Rodriguez adjusted his green Border Patrol cap and wiped the sweat from his forehead as he approached what appeared to be another discarded box truck. The white paint was sun-bleached and dust-covered, with no license plates visible from his angle. It sat motionless on the shoulder of the road, surrounded by nothing but dry brush and endless sky. "Dispatch, this is Agent Rodriguez," he radioed, his voice cutting through the static. "I've got an abandoned commercial vehicle at mile marker 47, conducting a routine check." His partner, Agent Sarah Chen, pulled up behind him in another patrol vehicle. She had been with the Border Patrol for 3 years and had seen her share of abandoned trucks used for smuggling operations. Most were empty by the time they found them, left behind after their cargo had been transferred elsewhere. The two agents approached the truck cautiously, their boots crunching on the gravel. Rodriguez noticed the rear doors were sealed with heavy-duty locks and chains, unusual for a truly abandoned vehicle. Something about this scene didn't feel right. Chen walked around to the front of the truck, checking the cab. "Engine's cold," she called out. "Looks like it's been here for a while." But as Rodriguez moved closer to the rear doors, he paused. Was that sound coming from inside? He held up his hand, signaling Chen to stop talking. In the oppressive silence of the desert, he could swear he heard something. A rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just an abandoned truck. Someone was trapped inside. Rodriguez pressed his ear against the hot metal of the truck's rear door. The sound was unmistakable now. Desperate knocking from within, accompanied by muffled voices speaking in Spanish. The metal was scorching to the touch, heated by hours of direct sunlight. "Chen, get over here," he called urgently. "We've got people inside this thing." Agent Chen rushed to his side, her hand instinctively moving to her radio. As she listened, her expression grew grave. The voices inside were weak, strained, some barely audible. Among them, she could make out what sounded like a child crying. "How long do you think they've been in there?" Chen asked, sweat beading on her forehead despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Rodriguez examined the locks more closely. The chains were industrial grade, and the truck's ventilation system appeared to have been deliberately disabled. "In this heat? Too long?" he replied grimly. The temperature inside that sealed metal box had to be approaching lethal levels. Every minute counted now. Rodriguez had seen cases like this before during his training, human trafficking operations where people were left to die in cargo containers and trucks. The survival window in temperatures like these was measured in hours, not days. "Dispatch, this is Agent Rodriguez." He spoke into his radio with controlled urgency. "We need immediate medical assistance and additional units at mile marker 47. We have multiple persons trapped inside a sealed commercial vehicle. Repeat, this is a rescue situation." Chen was already moving toward their vehicles to retrieve the emergency equipment. "I'm getting the bolt cutters and the medical kit," she shouted. From inside the truck, the knocking grew more frantic. Someone had heard their voices. Hope was keeping them alive, But Rodriguez knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. They needed air, water, and medical attention. And they needed it now. As he began working on the locks, Rodriguez could hear more voices joining in from inside. Men, women, children, an entire group of people fighting for their lives in what had become a metal furnace under the Texas sun. The bolt cutters felt heavy in Rodriguez's hands as he positioned them against the first chain. The metal was so hot, it nearly burned through his tactical gloves. Behind him, Chen had retrieved every piece of emergency equipment from both vehicles, medical supplies, water bottles, and a portable oxygen tank they kept for emergencies. "Estamos aquí para ayudar!" Rodriguez called out in Spanish, his voice carrying over the desert wind. "We're here to help! Stay away from the doors!" The response from inside was immediate, a chorus of weak voices crying out in relief and desperation. Someone was banging frantically against the metal, the sound echoing in the oppressive heat. The first chain snapped under the pressure of the bolt cutters. Rodriguez moved quickly to the second lock, his uniform already soaked with sweat. The sun seemed to beat down harder with each passing minute, and he could only imagine the conditions inside that sealed container. Chen positioned herself with the medical supplies, her training kicking in. "I've called for additional medical units and backup," she reported. "ETA is 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like a lifetime. The second chain gave way, and Rodriguez moved to the final lock mechanism. This one was different, a heavy-duty padlock that would require more precision. As he worked, he could hear someone inside speaking softly, what sounded like a mother trying to calm a child. "Almost there," he muttered, adjusting his grip on the cutters. The lock clicked open, and Rodriguez immediately grabbed the door handles. The metal was scorching hot, forcing him to use his tactical gloves and a towel from their emergency kit. "On three," he said to Chen, who had positioned herself to help pull the doors open. "1, 2, 3! The doors swung open with a metallic groan, and immediately a wave of superheated air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of human suffering and desperation. The temperature inside had to be well over 130 degrees. What they saw in those first moments would stay with both agents for the rest of their careers. The interior of the truck was a scene from a nightmare. Dozens of people were crammed into a space meant for cargo, their faces flushed red from heat exhaustion, clothes soaked with sweat. Men, women, and children sat shoulder to shoulder, many too weak to stand when the doors opened. Rodriguez immediately began helping people out of the truck, supporting those who couldn't walk on their own. "Easy, easy," he said gently as he guided an elderly man down from the truck bed. The man's legs buckled, and Rodriguez caught him, feeling how dangerously hot his skin was to the touch. Chen was already administering water to a young woman who appeared to be on the verge of heat stroke. "Small sips," she instructed, supporting the woman's head as she drank. "Just small sips." The situation was more critical than they had initially realized. Several people showed signs of severe dehydration, dry, cracked lips, sunken eyes, and skin that had lost its elasticity. Some were barely conscious, their bodies shutting down from the extreme heat exposure. "How many?" Rodriguez asked as he continued helping people from the truck. Chen did a quick count as she moved from person to person, checking vital signs. 23, no, 24. "And Rodriguez?" Her voice caught as she looked toward the back corner of the truck. In the darkest corner, a woman was cradling a small child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The child wasn't moving, wasn't responding to his mother's desperate whispers. His little body was limp, his breathing shallow and irregular. Rodriguez immediately moved toward them, his medical training taking over. He gently took the child from his mother's arms, feeling for a pulse. It was weak but present. The boy was alive but barely. "Chen, I need that oxygen tank now," he called out, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. As he began administering emergency care to the child, Rodriguez could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching. Help was coming, but for this little boy, every second was critical. The next few minutes would determine whether their rescue had arrived in time. Around them, other survivors were slowly recovering in the shade of the truck, drinking water and breathing fresh air for the first time in hours. The little boy's name was Carlos. His mother whispered through tears as Rodriguez worked to stabilize him. She had been holding him for hours, trying to keep him conscious, trying to keep him alive. Her name was Maria, and this was her son's first time making this dangerous journey. Rodriguez positioned the oxygen mask over Carlos's small face, monitoring his breathing carefully. The child's skin was dangerously hot to the touch, and his pulse was rapid and weak, classic signs of severe heat exhaustion bordering on heat stroke. "Carlos, can you hear me?" Rodriguez spoke softly in Spanish, gently tapping the boy's cheek. "Carlos, stay with us, buddy." Deej Chen had set up a triage area, using their vehicle as shade, organizing the other survivors by the severity of their conditions. Most were responding well to water and rest, but several others needed immediate medical attention. An elderly man was showing signs of confusion and disorientation, and a pregnant woman was experiencing contractions that may have been brought on by the stress and dehydration. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, but Rodriguez kept his focus on Carlos. He had seen too many cases where children didn't make it through situations like this. Their smaller bodies couldn't handle the extreme temperatures as long as adults could. "His breathing's getting stronger," Rodriguez observed, feeling a spark of hope as Carlos's eyelids fluttered slightly. Maria knelt beside them, her own condition critical, but her concern entirely focused on her son. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked in broken English, her voice barely above a whisper. Rodriguez looked into her eyes, seeing the desperation of a mother who had risked everything for a chance at a better life for her child. "We're doing everything we can," he assured her. "The ambulance is almost here." Carlos's eyes opened for a brief moment, unfocused but aware. He looked up at Rodriguez, then at his mother, and managed the faintest of smiles before closing his eyes again. It was a small sign, but it was enough to tell Rodriguez that the boy was fighting. In the distance, the first ambulance appeared on the horizon, followed by additional Border Patrol units and emergency medical vehicles. Help had arrived, but the race against time was far from over. If this story has you hooked so far, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in their place. The emergency medical team arrived like a well-oiled machine, immediately taking over the medical care of the most critical patients. Paramedic David Thompson, a 20-year veteran, quickly assessed Carlos and began advanced life support measures. "Core temperature is dangerously elevated," Thompson announced as he worked. "We need to get him cooled down and get IV fluid started immediately." Rodriguez stayed close, helping coordinate the care of the other survivors while keeping an eye on Carlos. The little boy had become more responsive since receiving oxygen, but he was still in critical condition. Dr. Elena Martinez, the emergency physician who had arrived with the medical helicopter, took charge of the triage operation. "Set up the cooling station under those tarps," she directed her team. "Anyone showing signs of heat stroke gets priority treatment." The scene had transformed from a desperate rescue operation into a full-scale medical emergency response. Multiple ambulances, a medical helicopter, and additional Border Patrol units had converged on the isolated stretch of highway. Agent Chen worked alongside the medical teams, helping to provide interpretation services and gathering information from the survivors. Many were from Central America, traveling through Mexico in hopes of finding safety and opportunity in the United States. Carlos was loaded onto a stretcher and prepared for air transport to the nearest hospital. His mother, Maria, was stable enough to travel with him, though she would also need medical treatment for her own heat exposure. "You saved his life," Dr. Martinez told Rodriguez as they watched the helicopter prepare for takeoff. "Another 30 minutes in that truck and we would have lost him." Rodriguez nodded, watching as Maria held her son's hand during the helicopter loading. The little boy was conscious now, weak but alive. "Just doing the job," he replied, though they both knew it had been more than just routine patrol work. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Carlos and Maria to safety, Rodriguez looked back at the truck that had nearly become their tomb. 24 people had been trapped inside, and all 24 were going to survive because 2 Border Patrol agents had heard faint knocking through hot metal on a desert highway. With Carlos and the most critical patients en route to hospitals, the focus shifted to caring for the remaining survivors. A mobile command unit had been established, providing shade, water, and medical evaluation for everyone who had been trapped in the truck. Rodriguez moved among the survivors, checking on their conditions and gathering information that might help identify those responsible for abandoning them. Each person had a story: families seeking reunification, individuals fleeing violence, parents hoping to give their children better opportunities. One man, Eduardo, approached Rodriguez with tears in his eyes. "Gracias," he said simply, clasping the agent's hand. "You saved us, all of us." Chen was coordinating with federal investigators who had arrived to process the scene. The truck would be examined for evidence, and efforts would be made to track down the smuggling organization responsible for putting these people in such a dangerous situation. "Any word on Carlos?" Rodriguez asked Dr. Martinez, who had remained on scene to oversee the continued medical care. "The hospital just called," she replied with a smile. "He's stable and responding well to treatment. Full recovery expected." The relief was visible on Rodriguez's face. In his 6 years with Border Patrol, he had seen too many tragedies, too many situations where they had arrived too late. Today was different. As the afternoon wore on, the survivors were transported to facilities where they could receive proper medical care, food, and legal processing. The desert highway began to quiet down as the emergency vehicles departed one by one. Agent Chen stood beside Rodriguez as they watched the last ambulance disappear over the horizon. "Another day at the office?" she asked with a slight smile. Rodriguez looked back at the truck, then at the empty road where so much drama had unfolded. "Some days you save a life," he said. "Some days you save 24 lives." The sun was still blazing overhead, but the immediate crisis had passed. 24 people who had been left to die were now receiving the care they needed, and a little boy named Carlos was going to go home with his mother. As the medical emergency phase concluded, Rodriguez and Chen shifted into their investigative roles. The truck itself was now evidence in a federal human trafficking case, and every detail needed to be documented and preserved. Special Agent Lisa Warren from Homeland Security Investigations had arrived to coordinate the federal response. "This is the 3rd truck we've found in this area in the past 2 months," she informed Rodriguez. "We're dealing with a sophisticated smuggling operation." Rodriguez examined the truck more closely now that it was empty. The modifications were disturbing. The ventilation system had been deliberately disabled, and there were scratch marks on the interior walls where people had tried to claw their way out. "They were left here to die," he said grimly. The investigation would continue for weeks, but the immediate priority was ensuring that all survivors received proper care and protection. Chen was coordinating with immigration officials to ensure that those who needed medical treatment would receive it without immediate fear of deportation. "Carlos's mother wants to thank you," Chen told Rodriguez, showing him a message that had been relayed from the hospital. She says, "You're an angel." Rodriguez shook his head. "I'm just a border patrol agent who heard knocking." But Agent Warren overheard and disagreed. "You're a border patrol agent who took the time to listen. Not everyone would have heard those sounds, and not everyone would have acted as quickly as you did." The truth was that Rodriguez's 6 years of experience had taught him to pay attention to details that others might miss. The unusual locking mechanism, the sounds that didn't belong, the heat signature that suggested the truck had been recently abandoned. All of these factors had contributed to the successful rescue. As the day shifted toward evening, the last of the official vehicles departed the scene. The highway was quiet again, just another stretch of asphalt in the vast Texas desert. But for 24 people, this spot would forever represent the moment when hope triumphed over despair. Rodriguez and Chen completed their incident reports as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Tomorrow, they would be back on patrol, watching the same highways, protecting the same borders. 3 days later, Rodriguez received a call that made his week. Carlos had been released from the hospital and was doing well. The little boy, who had been barely conscious in that overheated truck, was now playing with other children at a temporary shelter facility. "Would you like to see him?" the social worker asked. "He's been asking about the officer who helped him." Rodriguez didn't hesitate. After his shift ended, he drove to the facility where Carlos and his mother were staying while their immigration case was processed. When he walked into the children's play area, a small voice called out in Spanish, "El policía que me ayudó!" "The police officer who helped me." Carlos ran over to Rodriguez, his face bright with the energy that only healthy children possess. Maria followed, tears in her eyes as she watched her son embrace the man who had saved his life. "How are you feeling, buddy?" Rodriguez asked in Spanish, kneeling down to Carlos's level. "Good," Carlos replied in English, proud to show off the few words he had learned. "Thank you," Maria spoke through an interpreter, expressing gratitude that went beyond words. "She says she prays for you every night," the interpreter explained. "She says you gave her son a future." Rodriguez spent an hour at the facility, playing with Carlos and talking with Maria about her hopes for their new life. It was a reminder of why he had joined Border Patrol in the first place, not just to enforce laws, but to protect people, to make a difference in lives that hung in the balance. When it was time to leave, Carlos gave Rodriguez a drawing he had made, a picture of a green truck and a man in uniform with a big smile. At the bottom, in careful letters, Carlos had written, "Mi héroe," my hero. As Rodriguez drove home that evening, he thought about the randomness of that day. If he had taken a different route, if Chen had been assigned to another sector, if they had driven past the truck without stopping to investigate, 24 people might have died in the desert heat. But they had stopped, they had listened, they had acted, and 24 people were alive because of it. 6 months later, Agent Rodriguez received an invitation that surprised him. Carlos and Maria were becoming US citizens, and they wanted him to be there for the ceremony. The federal courthouse in San Antonio was filled with families from around the world, all taking the oath of citizenship together. Rodriguez sat in the gallery, watching as Carlos, now healthy and growing, stood with his mother as they raised their right hands and pledged allegiance to their new country. After the ceremony, Carlos ran over to Rodriguez, still wearing his small suit and tie. "Officer Rodriguez, look!" He pointed to his certificate of citizenship, beaming with pride. Maria had learned more English in the past 6 months, and she was able to express her gratitude directly. "You gave us life," she said simply. "You gave us future." The investigation into the smuggling operation had been successful. 17 people had been arrested in connection with the human trafficking ring, including the individuals who had abandoned the truck on that desert highway. Other potential victims had been identified and rescued before similar tragedies could occur. Rodriguez had received commendations from the Border Patrol, from Homeland Security, and from the local community. But none of those awards meant as much to him as seeing Carlos healthy and happy, starting his new life as an American citizen. As he drove home that evening, Rodriguez reflected on the lesson that experience had taught him. Sometimes the most important moments in life happen when you simply pay attention to what others might ignore. A sound that didn't belong, a situation that didn't look right, a moment when action was required rather than procedure. That day on Highway 83, under the scorching Texas sun, 2 Border Patrol agents had stood between life and death for 24 people. They had heard the faint knocking through hot metal. They had acted with courage and compassion, and they had arrived just in time. Carlos would grow up as an American, with opportunities his mother had only dreamed of when she made that dangerous journey. And somewhere in South Texas, Agent Miguel Rodriguez continues his patrol, listening for sounds that don't belong, watching for signs that someone needs help, ready to stand once again between life and death. Because that's what guardians do. That's their calling. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments.